I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Caligula Effect is attempting to fill the gap of a lower budget Persona game. Some people may consider it to be a knockoff or a cheap copy, and in a sense, those people might have a point. That said, after playing it, I do think that it's definitely its own thing, but it absolutely wears its inspiration on its sleeve. I don't believe that to be a bad thing though. As I've always said, the gaming world has more than enough space for similarly styled games. Just look at Nexomon and Pokemon for example. I personally enjoyed Nexomon Extinction far more than the Pokemon Sword and Shield games, which were, in my opinion, the worst mainline Pokemon games ever made. It's all subjective of course, but my point is, Caligula Effect isn't considered an average game only due to how much better Persona is. The Caligula Effect is considered an average game because it simply isn't that well realized in the first place. So what is the Caligula Effect Overdose all about? Well, it's a Persona-esque JRPG with social link elements and a hybrid timeline-based combat system. The Overdose version of the game came out in 2018 and you can get it on PS4, PS5, Nintendo Switch and PC. This iteration with the Overdose moniker is actually a remake of the original release, which was on the PS Vita only a year prior in 2017. The game is set in a digital world known as Morbius, which is controlled by a powerful virtual idol-style character named Mew. It's a place that was originally created for people who want to escape their normal lives in the real world, but these people are now stuck here and forced to relive 3 years of high school again and again forever. There are a few people in this world who seem to know that they're stuck in a virtual reality and form a group called the Go Home Club with the goal of escaping Mobius. You play as a character who realizes what's going on and very quickly joins the Go Home Club at the start of the game. In this version of the game you can actually choose to be male or female, an option that wasn't present in the original Vita release. It doesn't really change too much outside of some dialogue and a few scenes, but if you want to platinum the game, it will require a male and female playthrough. A lot of the game functions mostly as you would expect. It's a JRPG with battles, leveling up, skills to learn, items to equip, and a mystery to unravel. I think it does everything decently enough, but just like with Metal Max Xeno Reborn, which I reviewed a little while ago, the combat system really lets it down for me, but we'll get into that in a bit. Structurally, the game is basically a standard dungeon crawler. It's kinda like the palaces or jails from Persona 5 and Persona 5 Strikers, but without all of the other mechanics and depth. It does have some other systems at play, but it's nowhere near as fleshed out, which, considering the scope and budget of the game, is to be expected. I'm not going to go into every minute detail as this isn't really supposed to be a proper review, but you'll be chatting to various NPCs, roaming the school, getting into battles, engaging with the causality link, and completing story arcs. I don't think it's worth explaining how you walk around the school or level up as it's going to be obvious to 99% of you, but I do think we should talk about the equipment, the causality links, and the battle system. Firstly, let's look at equipment. The items you collect are represented by what the game calls stigmas. These stigmas come in 4 categories: attack, defense, amplification, and passive. To put things simply, these stigmas all grant various bonuses to certain stats like HP or critical, for example. By collecting specific stigmas, you can really customize the characters and push them towards certain build types. When you mix this system with the skill points that you spend on new abilities, it becomes what I would call a standard but solid RPG foundation. While these are very common systems, I did appreciate how straightforward it all is. I think the extremely sleek looking and cleanly designed menus really help with that aspect as well. In fact, while I'm on the subject of how things look, I don't think the game looks awful, but I really don't think it looks that great either. The 2D artwork and illustrations of the characters look incredible though, I really do like them, and funnily enough, that's what drew me to the game in the first place. I had zero idea what this game actually was, but the art that I saw was so good that I just had to try it out. It's got this almost, clinical or surgical precision to it. It feels very sharp and modern. I mean, whatever it is, I really like it, and I think it's a shame that the 3D work is nowhere near as strong, at least in my opinion. It's got some decent style to it though, I'll give it that, but overall I found it to be a bit lacking. It's a bit of a weird situation because the game is referred to as a remake, but it doesn't quite feel like it deserves that term. It's kind of halfway between a remaster and a remake from what I can tell after researching the original. I suppose you can still say it's a remake, it's just not a complete one. So the causality link system is one thing that the game touted as a somewhat big feature. It revolves around you speaking with the other students and getting to know them in order to unlock bonuses on the causality link menu. Speaking to them over and over will give you some dialogue about their problems and level up your bond to a certain point. However, some students won't even talk to you unless you're at a specific friendship level with another student, and there's a ton of variations on those requirements as well. I think the idea behind it is quite good, but I think the execution lands with a thud. I understand how it all works, and I get what they were going for. I mean, it works well enough, but it just feels like a very lackluster thing to engage with. Plus, actually navigating around the giant web of nodes is less than ideal. I've heard that a lot of players just end up ignoring it and only using it when they absolutely have to, and sadly I kind of feel the same way. Lastly, let's talk about the combat and how that plays out. It's a sort of hybrid between a turn-based system and a timeline system. As you roam the school, you'll come across what the game calls digiheads. These are the main enemies that you'll be fighting throughout the entire story. There is a little bit more to them than what I'm about to say, but they are essentially people who turn into corrupted monsters due to their dependency on Mobius. When one of these digiheads spots you, a battle will immediately begin. If you can manage to sneak up on one of them though, you can initiate the fight yourself with an attack which will give you an advantage. What you're seeing here is the battle screen. You'll notice that there is a timeline at the top right corner, and that's very important. When you select an action or an attack, it will be placed temporarily on the timeline and the game will show you a prediction of the outcome. For example, let's say you choose a standard ranged attack. The game will show you how that'll look, but you haven't actually committed to the action yet. The prediction can't do things like show you if the attack will miss though, as that kind of thing is up to your stats. Another thing you can do is place your attacks on the timeline in such a way that characters can perform combos. Let's say you pick a launcher attack with one character, and then you pick an attack that deals big damage to enemies that are airborne with another character. Well, you'll need to go to the timeline and manually adjust when certain attacks will land on these enemies. You can do some really elaborate and complex things with this system, but I just felt like the amount of effort you need to go through to pull these things off really doesn't feel worth it at all to me. When you have one character to control at the start of the game, the timeline stuff is very easy and quick to manage, but once you have 3 or 4 characters in your party and you're fighting against multiple enemies, I found it to just get very cumbersome very quickly. I spent a lot of time on the normal difficulty of the game trying to learn this system properly, and I think I have a good handle on it, but it's just not for me. You have to do so much setup for such a small payoff, and something that should take 1 or 2 button presses becomes a detailed tactical plan, and from very early on the system as a whole just felt overdeveloped. The conceptual idea behind the timeline, and the causality link for that matter, are genuinely quite interesting to me, but I think the implementation of them is very sloppy as far as my tastes go. In all fairness, it isn't unplayable, but I would assume that these systems being so overblown is why the Caligula Effect games aren't thought of more positively. In my opinion, the Caligula Effect Overdose is a very uneven experience. I like the story, the characters, the 2D art, the menus, and the in-game graphics are okay. That said, the game really falls flat for me personally during combat. I found every fight to be such a chore that I would personally find it pretty difficult to recommend this game to you. I think that the causality link stuff feels kinda unnecessary as well. I mean, perhaps if they had just done things differently in a different way, it may have worked, but with the way it is, it just doesn't do much for me. Ultimately, this is not a game that I'd feel comfortable recommending to most people, including JRPG fans. I do think that if you can click with the combat and really get into it, you'll have a much better time with it than I did. I would imagine that fans of JRPGs would feel right at home with most of the game's systems, but the combat and the causality link is going to be the sticking point. Whether or not you enjoy this game will probably hinge on those 2 things alone. If the game had standard turn-based combat and a revamped causality link system, I think this could have been a good or even great RPG. As it stands though, it's just alright. If you enjoy the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.